Hadi Tat Sat, welcome back to Chit Chat, where we're interested in getting our chit together, following the dictum that material well-being follows spiritual well-being. The word chit in Sanskrit means knowledge or it means awareness. And so if we can improve or remove the limitations and restriction on our own consciousness as individuals, then we do a great good for the collective. That's a really good tagline. I should have like that
Is
was
this
all.
record? Are we recording this?
It's recorded.
This is good material, Jaya.
Well,
Welcome,
we're here with
everyone.
Kishore and myself, and what are we talking about today?
Well, I think what you just said, your tagline was actually really, really awesome. Welcome,
I know.
Preeti.
Let
Welcome,
me try to write
Francisca.
it down while you're talking.
It was actually a really great tagline because it's and this is what we've spoken about in Chit Chat from the beginning of like getting our chit together, getting our spiritual internal life together. And I think it's so interesting, this new format that we're doing of Chit Chat where we like pick something, one or two things in the previous week that have happened in the news or cultural events or political happenings, etc. And we kind of dissect it a little bit and look at it from a spiritual lens. I think it's a really important thing, especially when I heard you describe what chit is and what we mean by getting our chit together, because sometimes it's so hard to get our chit together because we're accosted. I don't know about you, but I feel accosted by, I mean, just the material energy, just like walking around in any city. And then on top of that, like all the news stories, all the, sounds and noise that we're hearing, all the stories that are coming through our mind that we're seeing on our phone, that we're seeing on the television. So I thought that was a really perfect description. And what we're talking about
I
today,
wrote it down. I got it. I remembered
okay,
everything.
okay, good. What we're talking about today, Jaya, is something that you wanted to talk about, which I'm very interested in. But it's about, I don't know if y'all have heard, but Instagram slash Facebook slash WhatsApp.
They're taking over everything.
They're taking over everything. But apparently Instagram on December like 20th or something, like a week ago, came out with a whole new policies, like terms and conditions. And for anyone that uses Instagram, you probably may have forgotten this already, but you definitely got a message on your Instagram being like, there are new terms and policies. Do you agree? And without reading them, most people probably just went, sure. And I'm not calling anyone out.
I mean, why would you read it? It's like literally too long. Like, you know how when someone writes a message that's like a little bit more than 3 sentences, you write TLDR, like too long, didn't read. And if you look at the policies and they're just a jargon around it, it's like literally pages and pages and pages of jargon. Like, who's going to read it? So, of course, you're just going to hit agree. Sorry. Anyway, continue.
No, yeah, no, absolutely. I love it when you interrupt me because it's like, yeah, no, I do. That's our Bob here. For those of you that are new to Chit Chat, we are always jumping in on each other's sentences and our newer. You know what I was thinking about, Jaya? Sorry to go off on a tangent, but I was really thinking about that we could do like a Chit Chat spelling bee. Like that could be a really fun event.
Oh my God, I would lose so bad. Or is it badly? Like, you see how bad I am at English. I would not do well.
Well, that's why we should have one. Because it would really put us to the test. Anyway, what was I saying? So the terms and conditions came out, and I was definitely among the people that were just like, I'm not reading this. This is too long. I'm just pressing agree because this is a tool I use for social media and like whatever. But then all of these news stories started coming out about how like it's evil and basically Instagram is like able to look through our cameras now and take all this information from us.
Which is their camera according to the new policy.
Which is their camera. Yeah, if you read the fine print, which I did, they were like, when you're using our camera, I was like, oh, but I thought it's not mine. It's yours. And something that I was reading a bunch of different articles about this, and something interesting, there were definitely changes to the terms and conditions. But one of the things, the articles that I was reading was saying that like a lot of the stuff didn't change. There were like maybe like 4 or 5 new changes, but a lot of the stuff didn't change, but rather they just made it like absolutely clear, like super clear. Like, we are using your information and selling it to third-party companies to make money off of you. Like they just like spelled it out very, very like this. So, there it is, folks. That's it. It's kind of scary. We're living in scary times. I'll end with this. I put this meme up the other day, maybe like, I don't know, a few days ago, and I thought it was so funny when I saw this meme where it was like two women, and one woman, it was like black and white, and she was like, the meme title read something about like, you know, something about like how we wiretapping in the 60s or something. And then the woman was just like, oh, I better hang up this call because the government might be wiretapping me. And she like hangs up quickly. And then the other picture is like current day. And you know those Alexa things that Amazon has where you just like speak to them and whatever?
Yes.
So then it has like the woman in present day being like, wiretap, can I please have a recipe to pancakes? And it's like, and it's so cringy. It's so cringy because it's like, we know that it's true, but we don't want to accept that it's true. And the reason we don't want to accept that it's true is because basically it challenges our convenience, you know, our convenient lifestyle that we have of just like,
yes.
you know.
You've hit on a few. I usually have my notepad around me so I don't forget my ideas. First of all, I just want to share Rob Elings. He says here, I prefer Nandagram or Ekachakragram over Instagram. So clever. I wanted to share that.
Very nice.
Okay, you brought up a good point. It's a challenge to our convenience. That's one line of. Okay, let me start over. What interests me about these new changes in policies, or just to making clear of what's actually going on, is not so much the policies themselves, but the response to them. And the meme that you just brought up is a very, very pertinent to the concern that I have, I guess, on a personal level and also on a vicarious level. That what's the response to these new policies? Because, okay, I shared a video, kind of a satirical video talking about the new policies on my page. Now, I'm usually when I post things, they usually tends to generate a little bit of energy. A couple of weeks ago, I shared a thing about Mataji, like calling women mother, and
Ooh.
that thing went wild. And then I share like this satirical video, which is talking about something that's actually very concerning. And there was like very minimum interest in it, or even outrage or frustration about it, or even comments about it. I even asked, hey, how should we think about this? I even posed a question, which is something I normally don't do. I just usually leave the tea and then I just leave and occasionally check back in. So I found the sort of quiet kind of telling in a certain sense. So what it brought up for me is, one point it brought up for me is the point that you're already bringing up, that it's a challenge to our convenience. And therefore we tend to give it a pass, even though it may be a transgression on privacy, or not, it is a transgression on privacy, but because it's a convenience that I've become conditioned to be addicted to, I'll give it a pass. The other thing it kind of brought up for me is why persons who are in a oppressed position remain kind of like, almost like, I guess the word is complicit in their oppression. There's this nice statement. I can't predict my thoughts in the future, but there's this nice statement from James Allen's book, As a Man Thinketh. We did a whole book club on this. And he says, some people find fault with the oppressor, but there's very few people who find fault with the oppressed. Whereas the oppressor and the oppressed, they are co-operators in the function of ignorance. God, I'm kind of butchering that a little bit. I'm doing the best I can. Can I pull it up?
Pull it up. I think it's a really great, while you pull it up, I'll say something. I think it's a really great thing that you're about to pull up by James Allen, because I remember always having such an issue with that. I remember when I did some theater studies and I was like really into theater, and specifically I was very into theater being utilized as a tool for social change. And there's a specific form of theater called theater of the oppressed. And it was like all this work that we would do. I was in South America at the time as well. This was many, many years ago. And we would go into like communities and this and work with the communities and et cetera. And I remember always asking like why, I would ask my professors and stuff and like my, you know, theater troupe leaders, like why are we always dealing only with the oppressed? You know, what about the oppressor? Like I'm sure they're also going through it in a different way that might come off as very, you know, evil and this and etc. But they are also going through something in a certain way. And they're also part of this like really weird, seesaw dance thing. And the response that I got was so just like, shut it down. They were just like, no, like we don't deal with the oppressor, like down with the oppressor, and like that kind of energy and that kind of stuff. And I was in school and impressionable. So I was like, okay, we'll just keep working with the oppressor like this. But I was very, very, I've always been very interested in that for sure.
Okay. I did find the quote, but my Kindle on my computer is acting a fool today. Okay, here we go. Okay, check this out. This is a statement. Listen up, everyone. This is a very powerful statement. It's going to be very triggering. So trigger warning. It's probably going to be triggering for a lot of people, but it's a pretty deep statement in my personal opinion. He said, it has been usual for man to think and to say, many men are slaves because one is an oppressor. Let us hate the oppressor. Plenty of evidence of that today. So next sentence. But there is amongst an increasing few a tendency to reverse this judgment and to say, one man is an oppressor because many are slaves. Let us despise the slaves. Already triggered. I know. Let's read on a little bit. Just stay with me a little bit here. He says, the truth is that the oppressor and slaves are cooperators in ignorance. And while seeming to afflict each other, are in reality afflicting themselves. And then he goes on to say how we might view the issue, which I find to be inspiring. He says, a perfect knowledge perceives the action of law in the weakness of the oppressed and the misapplied power of the oppressor. And the action of law means there's a certain mentality that gives its effect. There's a relationship of cause and effect. And we understand cause and effect when it's dealing with the grosser world, but the cause and effect relationship exists on a subtle plane as well. And it also bears its fruit. And so there's a certain mentality that leads to the misapplied power. Just keeping it to what he's saying here. And there's a certain mentality that goes along with it and allows oneself to be, victimized in a sense. And this is kind of what I'm getting at with this whole Instagram thing, because I think this is where this is the connection I'm making. So anyway, he says, a perfect knowledge perceives the action of law in the weakness of the oppressed. That's us with our Instagram. Hey, we're going to invade all your privacy. How do you feel about that? No problem. You do you. we don't care. Okay, so there's the action of law in the weakness of the oppressed and the misapplied power of the oppressor. There's a certain mentality that's leading to that. A perfect love. So this is if you're like an enlightened person. A perfect love, seeing the suffering which both states entail, condemns neither. A perfect compassion embraces both oppressor and oppressed. He who has conquered weakness and has pushed away all selfish thoughts belongs neither to oppressor nor oppressed. He is free. I mean, that's just a very powerful statement by itself. This is from James Allen, As a Man Thinketh. It's a very short book, a powerful read for anyone else out there. So anyway, this is the other thing that this whole Instagram thing was bringing up for me. First of all, being complicit in it because, I'm attached. Basically, I've conditioned myself to be addicted to this. And so, yes, you can invade me if you want because I'm attached to something that you're offering. And then this other idea of how we allow ourselves to be complicit in our own oppression. And how come we don't do anything to protest it? I remember having this thinking. I really want to say this point. I remember having this thinking growing up. Okay, most of us, our understanding of the history of slavery growing up was the Roots movie. I don't know if you remember that, Roots with Kunta Kinte.
Yes.
Like it wasn't like we really studied deeply like the history of slavery as an institution the world over. It was like a very narrow-minded, and looking back on it, it was, for me, it seems clear that the academic institution was trying to frame our minds to think of something in a certain way. But in any case, our whole narrative was like this Kunta Kinte and the Roots movie and so on. And I remember watching that. I think it came on for like a whole week. It was like a series, and you just watch it the whole week with your family in the house. And I remember after Kunta Kinte gets to America and he's like in bondage and all that. And I remember watching the movie and thinking like these slaves legit outnumber the masters like 20-1. Like, why don't they protest? Like just take over and I'm sure there are like historical and very precise answers to that particular question. But I'm talking about from the perspective of a kid, like looking at that, I couldn't understand why they just didn't take over the plantation. And still not being fully aware of all the factors that may lead to that. But one factor that must have certainly played a role in it that I became aware of later on, just recently, recently. I didn't want to say recently because then it's like, how come you're just recently getting this? Are you like not intelligent? Anyway, is that one factor that comes in is just demoralization. That when you're so demoralized, you have no energy to do anything good for yourself. One thing I've been saying a lot to our friends in our guys group is that if you are demoralized, you will make demoralized choices. That's just the way that works. So it's important to like kind of build yourself up if you want to make better choices for your life. So I realized that, okay, there are a lot of slaves on the plantation, and because they're like thoroughly demoralized, they don't really fight for themselves. They have no sense of their inherent self-worth or even just a conventional self-worth. So therefore they don't do anything for themselves. They allow them. And I realized this talking to a friend. We were walking back from the gym in New York, and all his time was being arrested by work. So all the things that he really wanted to do for himself, he just didn't have any motivation to do. Like there were like, he had his list of things he wanted to do for himself, but because all his time was arrested by work, he doesn't have energy for that. So the extra time that he did get may have went into like more demoralizing choices because you just didn't have enough energy to do what was worthy for yourself. So I kind of remember saying to him, like, I get why the slaves were like stayed in that position for a really long time. They were just like utterly demoralized. And I don't think it occurs to the postmodern, millennial or Gen Z guy that we're demoralized people. I certainly didn't think that I don't think I'm demoralized, and it doesn't occur to us. So then talking to this friend, he was like, well, how can we understand if we're demoralized? And I said, I have a sort of metric by which I can understand if I'm demoralized. How do I spend my time and how do I spend my money? And if all of my time and all of my money is dedicated to something outside of myself, just in the work of just consumption, then I'm probably suffering from demoralization. If none of my time and none of my money goes into building myself up, not only on like just a grosser level even, but also on a inner level, like the building up of a healthy mind and intelligence, and ultimately our spirit, our soul, so to speak. Not that we build our spirit up, it is there, but like in terms of our spiritual practices and so on. If I can't put any time into that and zero money, it's like, when we were in the monastery and we would distribute the books, people wouldn't mind dropping hella money on some bullshit, excuse my Sanskrit. But if you ask them for like a couple of dollars for the Gita, it was like this big ordeal, and it's like, now I'm starting to chalk that up to like demoralization. Like it's okay for you to spend something else that's not for you, it doesn't benefit you anyway, but because it provides some stimulation and some thrill. So you can give your time, inordinate amounts of time also, you can give your money, but when it comes to doing things that actually build you up, then you don't do anything of that. That means you might be demoralized. And of course, this is probably generally the case, and people may not be aware of it until it hits like a critical mass sort of situation where they develop like these like really weird habits, like chewing their nails, or they're like in hyper anxiety. And so they realize like something is amiss, even though I have this nice, what do they call it? Fortune 500 job. I have this, I have that, but something is amiss. It's like, that's because you're a slave and you're demoralized. And you're complicit in your own bondage. Like that's on you. Now, when you use the word slave, because in America, we have this very fixed image of slavery. So the word slave has, it creates an image that's really repulsive. And I'm not really commenting on that. I'm talking about like the modern slavery that we ourselves actually participate in. And this Instagram thing is an example of that to me. Here it is, we're being like completely invaded our privacy in like a very intense way. And
Yeah.
everyone's just like silent about it. Like there's
Mm.
no interest to protest. Maybe they're just a complete like, yeah, you know, whatever it is. And I have something I'm going to share about that because one of our dear friends wrote like a particular perspective saying we were going to talk about this. So I really want to share that with you, but maybe I'll stop here because I've been ranting for a little bit here. I want to hear maybe your thoughts or hear some other thoughts.
I love hearing you rant. I could hear you rant literally all day. For those of you that don't, for those of you that don't know this, me and Jai Jagannath were roommates in the Bhakti Center, and that's basically what we did. We just heard each other. We just heard each other rant in the room. We were either doing service outside of the room, or we were in the room just ranting to each other, and it was bliss. It was awesome. I really like Madhava Puri. He put this comment. He said, I truly believe all forms of oppression are romanticized and fetishized. We have been trained to derive pleasure from abusing ourselves. And I think that's such a powerful statement. Thank you so much, Madhavapuri. It's really like hard to read, you know, because it's like, what? We've been trained to derive pleasure from abusing ourselves. That's what it's saying. And if you really like just take a moment to think about that and to look at the way that society has played out, my lived experience is that that's 100% true. You know, like so many people are caught in this like vicious cycle of abuse, you know, whether that abuse is through physical, mental, emotional, financial abuse, you know, like electronic, social media abuse, all of this stuff. And I really like this point that you were making, and I wanted to further investigate into it a little bit more about how like your checklist for like, okay, well, how are you demoralized? And when you were speaking about that, it just really brought up a lived experience of mine, both as a professional and as like a child growing up. So I always like to give the two different examples because sometimes when I only give the professional example, people are like, meh, meh, meh. But I was a social worker for many years, and I worked in the Lower East Side of New York City. And I worked with low income clients who basically were losing their homes. The reasons were very different. You know, sometimes people would be, the clients that I would really love working with were the ones that like, I felt that their reason was very, what's the word? I guess we'll use your language, Jaya. Like it wasn't so demoralizing, you know, like something catastrophic happened in their life all of a sudden. You know, all of a sudden they got cancer and they didn't have money to pay for it. So they couldn't pay for their rent. And I was just like, oh my God, I feel really invested in this. But then I had a lot of clients that were just like very showing up at my office again and again and again. And I was in the welfare office with them again and again and again, and getting loans from them from the government again and again and again. And literally part of my job was sitting down with them and like doing financial planning. And every single time that I had to do that, it was exactly the same thing. They weren't spending money and energy into bettering themselves as a person. And of course, there can be many reasons as to why, that, okay, they were conditioned this way, or they were born in the projects or this or whatever, et cetera. But this is just the findings, right? So they weren't investing money in bettering themselves, and they were investing their money in appearances, in showing status in society, in like these kinds of things, right? And that has also been my lived experience, like with my family, because my mother is from Ecuador, and she came from like super duper poverty, and she like made it big in the United States, and like, you know, now she's a very well off woman. But it's so fascinating for me because I really like coming back here to well, I'm not in Ecuador right now because I just left. I'm in Brazil, but I was just in Ecuador for like almost 6 months. And it's so fascinating how it's like, you know, it doesn't really matter the quality of my being. Like the quality of my being is not what's important. What's important is what's on the outside, how I'm presenting, what clothes I have on, what gadgets I have on, if I'm in the know of this or whatever, social media, et cetera, whatever. And it's really, you know, just using Madhava Puri's language, it's really scary actually, because when we're caught in that, like, what's the word I'm looking for? When we're caught in that very demoralized, you know, fake value system, then we're so easily manipulated, you know, when we're caught in that value system. And I'm really thinking of myself too, you know, it's like when I'm caught in that value system of like Instagram and likes and how many followers do I have, when Instagram sends me a message being like, oh, we're gonna update our terms and whatever conditions, and we're gonna record everything you do. Like, I don't even read it. I'm just like, sure, whatever, because I'm caught in this vicious, abusive cycle of just, you know, like we were mentioning at the beginning, that oppressor and the oppressed is very much, they're kind of codependent. It's kind of like a really icky
Yeah, it's like a
codependent.
sick codependent relationship.
Yeah.
I also want to jump on this comment again from Madhavapuria and Michael Eper. He says, so we've been trained to derive pleasure from abusing ourselves. And hearing this statement, the first thing that came to my mind was dating apps, actually. It's because dating apps is like, it's kind of interesting. Like, I've never been on one, FYI. So at least so far. I don't put anything.
I'll remain quiet about that.
So, but the first thing that came to mind was dating apps, because in dating apps, you like Instagram, because Instagram's point is that because we're offering to you this tool for free, then you are the product.
Mm-hmm.
And so similar, like with a dating app, you're kind of like literally selling yourself or your image. So in other words, you're like agreeing to be objectified with the idea that I can get some stimulation out of that, or some form of pleasure out of it. So you get pleasure. Like, pleasure is the trade-off that you're looking for, but then you objectify yourself. So there's like a sense of a diminishing or devolving sense of like intrinsic self-worth. Like there's like lines that you're willing to cross as you start to lose a greater sense of your inherent self-worth. And like, even let's be real, the sort of memes that we send to each other, they're kind of like dark in nature. They're like super funny, and they're like a little dark in nature. There's stuff that I would definitely not share on my social media, because I don't want to get like messages in my DMs like, Jai, is everything okay? Like, I really noticed that you're like sharing a lot of these types of memes. Are you is this a cry for help? You know, so I don't want to share that sort of stuff, but it's just to that Madhavapuri's point, like deriving pleasure from abusing ourselves to some degree. And like, why would someone do that unless, like, and then there might be many reasons to it. This is just my line of thinking right now. Unless there's not a sense of inherent self-worth. And I feel, and this is a feeling. I feel like I could also probably try to empirically demonstrate it if I was take time to, you know, do research. But there does seem to me to be a sense of, or at least a relation between the secularization of society and the diminishing sense of self-worth. Because
Absolutely.
at least in religious or spiritual, you know, communities or civilizations, like especially like Eastern world, Vedanta especially, like your worth is intrinsic. So even if you do something like mad crazy in the material world, it doesn't diminish your self-worth. To give a really dramatic example for some people, trigger warning, Donald Trump's intrinsic self-worth is not diminished because he's Donald Trump, or Hitler for that matter, or Stalin, or any of these crazy people. Their intrinsic self-worth is, you can say, unmolested, even though they're doing all sorts of crazy demonic activity. Which is a little bit different from like you have, let's say, the religious world, the Middle Eastern traditions. Not that I've studied them very carefully, but at least because I did grow up in that environment, the presentation of it at least is that your worth was kind of connected to what you were doing. So if you did good things, your worth increased, and if you did bad things, your worth decreased. So in Vedanta tradition, that's not the case. Your intrinsic worth is fixed. And the basic worth is that you're part and parcel of the supreme reality, Bhagavan or Paramatma. And so your intrinsic worth, so if you do pious activity, it's not like your worth is increased because of that. Or if you do really crazy, sinful things, it's not decreased. So it's fixed. And once you have a sense of that sort of self, you know, you can call it the irreducible self, the self that's not really related to matter at all, then you can start thinking in terms of what is the best for that self. You know, and of course, if you ask a Vedantist or a spiritual religious guy, then what's best for that self is spiritual activity, and arranging our life in such a way that it helps that self to offer itself and everything around it to the absolute reality, which it and everything around it is a part of. That becomes the activity. But once you become separate from that sense, and that is considered, at least in our tradition, that's considered the root issue, that we have a psychological separateness from God. We can never be separate from God because he's the ground of all existence. So that's not possible. But we can have a psychological sense that we are separate. And from there, you start thinking, I'm separate. I think nature is separate. And so once you're disconnected from that which actually gives us our inherent self-worth, then from there, with the great passing of time, the sense of that self just starts dropping more and more and more. And once you like lose self-respect because you have no awareness of your self-worth, then there's like literally no line that you will be unwilling to cross.
And that's
like,
a scary place to be. That's a scary place to be.
That's terrible. Like literally you can cross any line. I was joking with a friend of mine the other day. We were having a really good conversation, and he was just joking how like because our sense of like self-worth or self-respect has been intrinsically tied to how others view us. This was the point that he was making. So he was like, I was living in a community of like spiritual people, and so I had a sense of myself connected to how they viewed me. So when COVID and lockdown hit, and I didn't have the support of a group around me viewing me in a certain way, then he said, I kind of discovered that I kind of didn't have a lot of like personal self-respect. And the result of not finding personal self-respect was that, you know, he said, literally any day I couldn't trust myself because literally anything can happen. Like, can you imagine waking up and thinking like, okay, anything can happen today. Like you can't trust yourself. And so, yeah, there seems to be a relation there between the secularization of society and this diminishing sense of self-worth, and then this being able to like become, just rape me for all I care. Like, you know, take over all my stuff, and you know, you can invade all of my no problem. It doesn't matter because, and anyway, this is a little bit of maybe a logical leap, but yeah, it doesn't really matter because I'm not having a sense of like my own sense of self, my own boundaries. And like, these are lines that I will never cross. These are lines that I will not allow others to cross. And all of that has kind of been like, it seems like it's been dissipating. And so it allows for the oppressed, as you said, this sort of really weird and awkward codependent relationship between oppressor and oppressed.
My every time I've been teaching Bhagavad Gita lately, and it's been going really nice. It's my first time like teaching Bhagavad Gita, and it's so nice for anyone that's ever taught anything. You know that like whenever you teach something, you learn it so much more, and so I'm feeling very grateful for that experience. But every time we talk about this, you know, issue, oh my God, not being able to trust yourself is such a horrible feeling. Yes.
Forget horrible. It's scary.
It's scary. I've been there
like
now.
You wake up and like you can't, anything may happen.
I have been there many times. Thankfully, I'm not on those places anymore, but we're not going to get into that. We're not going to get into that. But I was really thinking about, when we talk about this topic of the soul in Bhagavad Gita and the nature of the soul and the material body and the gunas and etc. The question that, and you know, dharma and you know, all of these big topics that are coming up in Bhagavad Gita, everyone always has the same question. Well, what is my duty? What am I supposed to do? You know, what's my role in society? I was like explaining Varnashram and this and Vedic society. Okay, great. But what am I? Who am I? Who am I and what am I supposed to do? You know? And I think because people are in such a, you brought up this very valid point of I feel like the secularization of society has really led people to this existential crisis, essentially, of not knowing who they are. Because I don't know who I am, then it's really easy for me to find worth and value in social media, in apps, in the news stories that I can recollect, and you know, and all this stuff. And like we mentioned at the beginning, it becomes a very degraded place to be in. It becomes a very easily manipulated place to be. And I think it's, for some strange reason, it's very, I don't know if it's hard, but like taking that leap from you know, most people in a secularized society, I'm just going to make this generalization, the underlying current of like what we're here for life, you know, what life is here for and why we're here is to derive pleasure from it. You know, like that's the messaging.
That's
That's
the
the
big
general.
fundamental
Yeah,
mistake. Yeah.
yeah. That's the general message that we're receiving in like ads and social media and this and etc. Billboards, anything. It's like you're here, you only live once. You know, live your life, do whatever, like this. And because that's been so ingrained into our minds, we're stuck. We're really stuck in this like very, very dark, demoralized place of thinking. To make the leap from, you know, that to a Krishna conscious spiritual way of understanding life, it's like the gap is just getting farther and farther and farther. You know, it's just like, oh, I'm a spirit soul and I'm meant here to serve others and, you know, awaken my pure love of God, or I'm just here to like derive absolute, like suck out all the pleasure of life. And
You know what this is reminding me of? Sorry, this image from Matrix. I know it's an old movie, but I'm sure everyone's seen it. So when Neo's getting trained up by Morpheus and he does his first jump, you know,
yes,
and so Morpheus like does it. And he's like, just, you know, suspend. It's not real, whatever. He gets him the, so he's like, okay, I could do this. I could do this. And Trinity's like over there, like biting her nails, like hoping that, because, you know, he's supposed to be the one and she's supposed to fall in love with the one. And so he's like running. And then he like jumps and it looks like he's going somewhere. And then he's like, ah. So trying to go from what you're saying, from like where we're coming from and how we've been culturally conditioned to like Christian consciousness, it can be like that sort of jump. And it may feel that way. How am I going to make it across?
Yeah. How am I going to make it across? And also like, how am I going to make it across? And also like, you know, I really feel like it's, you know, for people that are new or for people that are, you know, going through something very difficult. I mean, this whole quarantine COVID situation has been so demoralizing and difficult for people. It sometimes feels like you're teetering on that edge, you know, but I really think that you hit such a golden point of just like, we have to constantly remind ourselves and remind each other, you know, through Sangha of like, what is the purpose of this life? You know, what is the purpose of this life? Sometimes I'll stop myself. Like I'll have moments of like, I don't know if it's an out of body experience, but I'm gonna, you know, call myself out here. I'll have moments where I'm just literally on my Instagram, getting back to Instagram, in my mind, rationalizing like, okay, it's only been 10 minutes, like just 5 more minutes, like whatever. Yeah. And then it's 15 minutes and I'm like, okay, whatever. It's over. And then like once it starts to get to like that 25-minute, 30-minute, I've just been on the phone. Like I haven't moved. I'm just on my bed. Like I have this like I have this internal switch that's just like, what is wrong with me? Like, what am I doing? I'm like a vegetable on my bed, and Instagram is watching me through the camera and selling this image of me to like third-party companies, you know? Oh my God. Laugh all you want. I know it's happened to everyone here before. And I think also like accepting where we're at with that, because like I really try not to be too hard on myself in those moments, and I'll just really try to catch myself. You know, I'll just be like, okay, why am I on my phone for 10 minutes? Like I don't need to do this. This is making me stressed out. This is making me anxious. And what I often do, and what I really often do in those moments is that I mean, I don't know if this is like good behavior, but maybe it's self-deprecating. I'm not sure. But I'll just be like, wow, I was 30 minutes on this silly Instagram and I still have 10 rounds to chant. What the hell am I doing? You know, like I'll literally talk to myself, you know, snap out of it. I get up and I like go to chant my rounds, you know, something like that. And that works for me. I don't know. I don't know if
I'm going to bring this up. This is from Robert Forenbach.
Yes.
Okay.
Forenbach.
Sorry, forgive me. Maintain and create a safe space within yourself. Yeah, easier said than done. And I think, yeah, what I feel that we're getting at here is because there hasn't been sufficient work in discovering, you know, uncovering the sacred center, you know, wherein lies the soul in communion with the ground of being, which is God. And that hasn't been discovered by the vast majority of humanity. then you're more or less obliged to consume identities that are being sold, right? Now this happens on a metaphysical level as it happens on the conventional level. Like on a metaphysical level, like according to theistic Vedanta that we follow, Maya has two functions. One function is called Jiva Maya, another function called Guna Maya. There are different terms that are used for this, but Jiva Maya is also known as the Anavrita Shakti, the covering potency, Avrita Shakti, or Avharana Shakti. Avharana means like to cover. So Maya has a Shakti, Jiva Maya, or Avharana Shakti, which covers your own sense of identity, which means the inherent I of the self is covered so that you don't have awareness of it. And that is a very strange thing because think of it like being blazing hot fire and not knowing that you burn. It's a very strange thing. And then our philosophy deals with this conundrum because it's a little bit of a conundrum. Like, how can you be not aware of yourself? So this is the first potency of Maya, Jiva Maya, or Bharana Shakti. So now that you don't have a sense of the intrinsic I, then the next thing that Maya does is offer you a different option. And this is called Guna Maya. Guna Maya means she sends a plethora of gunas your way in the different configurations and transformations. And then you embrace that. And this is what we normally call as the conditioning by Maya Shakti. So this on a more metaphysical level or abstract. So just as above, in a sense, so below. So just as this is happening to us on an ontological level, this happens to us on an empirical level, like in our conventional day-to-day movements, that we don't have a sense of who we are, even conventionally. So then these different identities are being sold to us. Now, that wouldn't be like extremely problematic if the people selling the identities weren't like demonic, but because they're selling us hypersexualization, they're selling us a demoralized image. And it's like going to a mask shop, like because you're going for a masquerade. And so there's all these different masks there, and they're all like not very high level masks. They're just like very low, but those are the masks that you have to choose from. And so that becomes a dangerous situation that we're placed in when we're not connected to who we are, even on a conventional level. Then what then to speak of a metaphysical level, this becomes like the issue. And then once you, like I brought this example up before, but I'm a 90s kid. So we grew up there was this movie, The Mask, with Jim Carrey. In the beginning of the movie, he's like able to take the mask on and off at will, but throughout the progression of the movie, the mask becomes like, I don't know what's the word I'm looking for, like
fused,
or like almost like it's like it's gripping his face, and he's unable to take it off. The longer it stays on, the more difficult it becomes to take off. And so the longer we kind of exist in this existential melees due to not being super proactive in our own self-discovery, the more these different identities that are being sold to us get, I'm looking for another word, not gripped, but like dating yourself over and over. Dating yourself over and over. Yeah. I'm looking for a word like scripted. It's not like scripted. Grafted. That was the word I'm looking for. Thank you. So it gets like grafted onto you and you can't take it off. And in this particular instance that we're talking about now with Instagram, we have this demoralized mask that's been grafted onto us that says, basically, in essence, you are a consumer. You ain't, and again, excuse my Sanskrit, but sometimes you need to use these words to really get your point across. You ain't shit but a consumer. You are, I think in this movie, The Social Dilemma, which I still haven't seen yet, but I was hearing from different friends, they were using the word like a user, right? You are a user. They actually, the way we relate to social media is like a drug addict relating to his drugs. So that you have companies looking at whole populations as users. In other words, you ain't shit but a consumer, and we're going to sell you this BS, and you're going to eat it up because you're so demoralized. You're nothing but a pig, and you're going to eat this, and you're going to like it. That's like basically the situation. So it becomes very, I'm I mean, it becomes very dangerous. So when you come to like a spiritual movement and we're like, you have to find yourself. And often we have like I'm being a little bit strong here, you know, because I think we need to hear it like this also sometimes. Because
Yeah.
normally we hear it in like a very like you have to come discover yourself and love yourself, and it's like the message, and it's a beautiful message. But we need to hear the Vyatirek presentation. Vyatirek means there's a positive presentation of something to get you to do something, and there's also the negative presentation of something to get you to do the same thing. So that the positive inference is called anvaya. Anvaya means do bhakti and you get Vaikuntha. It's called anvaya. Vyatireka means if you don't do bhakti, you're gonna go to hell. So you're like, okay, I'll do bhakti. So any advertisement, you know, and Shastra is advertising in a sense too, in that sense. It's got this anvaya vyatireka approach. So we usually have the anvaya point like you have to discover yourself. This is important, XYZ. But then there's also the vyatirek. If you don't do this, then you're gonna be a pig and you're gonna be eating some nasty, you know, and you'll end your life suffering and die in this way. It's not a very positive thing.
Yeah, I like Maharani Vrinda Devi. She's just saying like, no, it's great. We have to hear it, and I think we do have to hear it because Joe said this earlier. The point of no return is when you can't go to the bathroom without taking your phone, and it's like, and that's why we need to hear it. That's why we need this like tough love sometimes. You know, I need this tough love sometimes for sure, absolutely, because I'm in this state where like my phone becomes fused to my hand. I'm taking it with me everywhere I go. I'm on the couch 30 minutes like this. And for me, you know, I'm thinking. I wanted to share a verse that I immediately thought of when we were speaking, and it's heavy. But it's really nice. It's a really nice verse in Bhagavad Gita. In Bhagavad Gita, there are these verses at the beginning of the 6th chapter. I think it's like verses 5 and 6. I can't remember them word for word, but it's speaking about how like the uncontrolled mind can be the worst enemy, and we have to bring the mind under the control of the self. And when the mind is under the control of the self, it becomes one's best friend. And when the mind is under the control of the self, not only does it become one's best friend, but you really have like an ally to help you dive deeper into excavating all of the identities, all of the stuff. You know, imagine how hard this is already. Like we're all trying to practice spiritual life. It's very, very, you know, difficult. Of course, it's beautiful and amazing, but it's difficult. So it's like when that mind is controlled, it's like a friend helping us dig through all that, you know, through all that garbage. That's not the verse I wanted to share. Those are like those are the preamble verses that I share with like my Bhagavad Gita class that I do. The verse is Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 10, Chapter 87, verse 22, and it's and I think it's very applicable. It's very applicable. It says, "When this human body is used for your devotional service, it acts as one's self, friend, and beloved. But unfortunately, although you always show mercy to the conditioned souls and affectionately help them in every way, and although you are their true self, people in general fail to delight in you. Instead, they commit spiritual suicide by worshiping illusion. Alas, because they persistently hope for success in their devotion to the unreal, they continue to wander about this greatly fearful world, assuming various degraded bodies." Every time I read this verse, it's heavy, but it's such a reality check. And sometimes I feel like it's a reality check that I really need sometimes. You know, I was joking around with Jay Jagannath. Jay Jagannath and I text a lot and we send each other funny memes, but I was joking around with him a lot about, you know, like Prabhu, God, you know, I was living in the ashram and trying to be spiritual, and now I'm out of the ashram and I'm just like straight up materialistic, just like nicest neighborhoods, like where my criteria is like nicest neighborhoods where I'm gonna stay, nicest cafes, nicest boutiques, nicest everything. I was like, what's happened to me? I've just gone into this materialistic way of being. And I feel like I really do need these verses sometimes to just like, you know, I feel like we all do, to just like jolt us back into gear. It's like, remember what the purpose of this life is, you know, remember why we're here. It's not to be on Instagram for 30, 40 minutes, an hour. It's not to binge on Netflix. Everyone who binges on Netflix, you don't feel good afterwards. Like it seems like a good idea at the time.
It's not binging. It's called running. It's a marathon.
Oh, it's a marathon. Is that the PC way of saying it? I don't know about y'all, but after my like 6th episode of RuPaul's Drag Race or something like that, I feel like garbage. I feel like shit. Like, what did I do with my life? Like, I just wasted 6.5 hours of my life.
I wanted to share this statement Nam is saying here. They now make phones to combat addiction. You can only make calls and texts, no other apps. It's gaining popularity. And then the first thing I thought of when I saw that was like, okay, but am I going to buy one? Having heard that, having, discussed what we've discussed, and the problem that is not a small one. Are we prepared to make those changes? And that's when the difficulty really comes in. I wanted to share one other thing here, and this is coming from a dear friend to both of us. They said, and this is just another perspective about this sort of invasion of privacy, which I found to be very interesting. They said, on another perspective, Sri Bhagavan is a supreme witness. He already has full surveillance on us since time immemorial. And if the info Instagram, collects were to be used against us, that too is under the protection/sanction of Bhagavan. So what is your thought on that? I had a few, just the visceral thoughts, not like what's immediately come to mind when you hear that? And I'll share what immediately came to mind for me also hearing that.
My visceral thought is like, yes, it is under the surveillance of Bhagavan and Sri Krishna. Yet at the same time, Krishna is very clear about his position in Bhagavad Gita about how his relationship in this world with devotees and non-devotees like this. And I remember when we were speaking about this topic before, you and I, and we were kind of joking about it, but also serious. I said something to you kind of in a plea, but also I was kind of serious, where I was just like, why can't because social media is also being used for great things, like so many people are connecting in ways that they wouldn't be able to connect. We're using social media right now. So many devotees during the pandemic have been using social media to connect all over the world. And I remember asking you, like, why can't we have social media? Like, why can't there be a world that exists where we just have social media without like demons and evil overlords who are like stealing our privacy and selling our images and selling our identities to third-party companies? Like, why does it have to be this way? Like, why can't it be a different way? And so to an extent, like my visceral reaction to that was just like, yes, Sri Bhagavan has surveillance over everything. But at the same time, I feel like, I don't know, I'm just thinking about like Krishna's neutrality and how much that's here in regards to the people who are like the overlords and in regards to the devotees who are using social media for devotional service, essentially.
Yeah. Okay. Here's my immediate response to this, like internally, was like, I'm curious where this is coming from. So the very first thing that I wrote back to this dear friend was that usually people have a hard time with invasive questions from a well-wisher. What to speak of someone like who has direct access to stuff and information. If a well-wisher asks you some like very like penetrating, invasive questions about things you don't really want to talk about, we usually feel highly disturbed about it. And so here you hear that someone's like looking at all this information. For all of those of you out there that have nudes on your phone, you might want to. I'm sorry, I had to get it out because I was joking like that to some of our other friends. Like, okay, I hope you don't got nudes on your phone because you may say that's a secular thing, but devotees, we humans too. So anyway, all jokes aside, so my first thing was like, if a well-wisher asks some like evasive question, you find it to be very frustrating. And here's someone who's not a well-wisher, likely not a well-wisher, who's just seeing you as a product and wants to use your information, is invading your privacy and it doesn't really disturb you. Or that was one thought that came to mind. The second thought was like, okay, maybe they're just resigning themselves. Because I had a similar post, like, this is the inevitable. So it's really about finding that inner, at the end of the day, what we call Krishna consciousness, like that elevated consciousness, that no matter what's happening in an external world, then you're not disturbed by it. So that was a kind of second thing that came to my mind also. And then it was this, but I couldn't help but lean back into the idea that, well, probably we're like attached. And we've conditioned ourselves so profoundly to this thing that we actually, okay, maybe some of us need it to some sense because we're doing it, like have our businesses through the phones and all these things like that, like we market ourselves. But we've conditioned ourselves so heavily to depend on this thing in so many different ways that, although that was like without the context, was like a very powerful spiritual point. God is behind everything. He's a witness of everything. And if something happens to you, that's his sanction. So without context, that's like a really good point. But with this context, it made me wonder that probably is it because we're so culturally attached that we're not willing to relinquish this attachment, even if it's not really good for us, not really helping us improving our life. Okay, maybe we're giving to others. So there's all this justification, but it just brought up these questions for me.
Also, I'm having another visceral reaction to this because as you were speaking, I'm just like, I feel like that's such a like fine line between like, oh, Krishna sees everything and so be it. So it is what it is, you know? I feel like that's a very blurry line to navigate, essentially, because it's like, if Krishna sees everything, then whatever, then I can do whatever I want and everything is happening under his sanction and etc. But it's like, I remember we had this chit chat a long time ago where the episode was called "You're in Maya and So Are We" or something like that. Yeah. And I think it's like, okay, how, you know, I feel like there needs to be some personal responsibility. Of course, Krishna is surveilling everything and knows everything and etc. But there also needs to be some personal responsibility for us to really want to get back to Godhead, back to Krishna. You know, I don't think that it can just be like, oh, well, you know, Krishna knows everything.
Yeah, that's
already,
like kind of, yeah, I think anyone would understand that and agree with that. I guess the response, the way that it read to me was that, because I had shared some videos on my Facebook page and so on. So it kind of was creating this sense of fear around the fact that these companies are invading your privacy. So the response is like, well, we really have nothing to fear at the end of the day, because Bhagavan is the witness of everything. So if anything happens, that is also sanctioned by him. And there, you know, in the sense that we should surrender. And that made sense to me. From that angle of vision, it made a lot of sense to me. But the other side was just like, okay, if Bhagavan, you know, wants you to like relinquish Instagram because the first thing you're looking at when you wake up is your phone and not your bead bag, like, are you willing to do that? Am I willing to do that? You know, if the first thing I do is grab my phone instead of my scripture, the first thing I do is, you know, if it's not really favorable, it's not really giving that uplift for your life, then are you prepared to relinquish that for that Bhagavan who's witnessing what you're doing? Because Bhagavan witnesses, but he's neutral. So he can like be witnessing and be looking like, look at this. All right, you ain't serious, homie. You know, on the one hand, you're going in front of the deities and we're like praying, Krishna, please. You know, like those memes, like, God, show me a sign. And then it's like this huge sign. The person's just like, I don't hear that. It's like, I have so many memes of that saved on my phone because they're just such hilarious memes. So it's like, when it comes to like clear signs or clear enough signs that this isn't really giving uplift for the life, but it's just like, nope, talk to the hand. I ain't about that. But then when it comes to this other thing, it's, you know, the government, you know, and this is like a very dangerous thing. It's like Bhagavan is the controller. So it becomes, like you said, very.
I'm just thinking of the memes that you were bringing up. I remember this one girl like in a meme praying like, God, please send me a sign to show me if, you know, this guy is right for me or something like this. And God literally like throws a toaster at her head and she like gets hit and she's like, please continue sending me signs. Like, it's just like, we just don't get it. We just don't get it.
Oh God. Okay, we'll close out soon, but we want to share. There are a couple of comments.
There's a couple of comments. I really like Joe has been saying to us to watch The Social Dilemma, which I've honestly it's been on my list for a while now, but I'm just like, I already know that it's just going to
I don't have
confirm.
Netflix. I don't have Netflix because after they did that cuties thing, even then I didn't have Netflix, but I was like, no, no,
No.
no.
So Joe says all of this internet and social media surveillance is all about commodification,
Yes.
advertising money, etc. It's such a manipulation, mind
Mhm.
f. It's almost hard to believe once you really find out what's going on.
That was the third point I want to bring up. Thank you, Joe. There was a third point I wanted to bring up in the beginning, that I feel that the denial of the extent of basically molestation that's happening is a coping mechanism. That was the third point I wanted to bring up. Like when you hear about something that's so evil, then in order to cope with it, you just deny it,
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
to accept the reality of it would be too overwhelming for the psyche, and it can cause you to just maybe have like a mental breakdown. So I do get a sense of like things that, now y'all know, those who know me, those who've been observing my trajectory over the last 6 to 8 months since lockdown, y'all know I got a conspiratorial angle of the things that are going on in the world. Not that I go out of my way to research them. I don't. I spend most of my time reading scriptures and talking to my friends. But I do have a conspiratorial like intuition about things, and my thinking tends to lean in that way. And so I do think there's some evil stuff going on big scales that are really hard to fathom. And not only are they hard to fathom, what I've discovered over this last 8-month period is that they're hard to believe for people, because if it were to be to believe, the extent of the evil that's actually going on would be too devastating for our waking consciousness to process. And so in order to cope with it, it's just kind of easier to deny it, or just deny it, or like downplay the severity of what's actually happening. So I get a sense, not only in this like particular statement, but just in the happenings of the world right now, I do get a sense that like we all need coping mechanisms, right? Like life is hard. Like people talking about life is meant for happiness. Wrong. Life is suffering. That is Dukalayama Shastram. That is a kind of basic in Eastern philosophy. That's kind of some of your starting points you're going to get. Like life is suffering. It is suffering. And we have, especially when we're not spiritually elevated, we need help from other coping mechanisms to deal with the difficulties of life. And when it comes to evil, like there is such a thing as evil. And it's not that people with conspiratorial minds, they just have a really bad problem of thinking the worst about people. Like there's those types too, but there are also just like really thoughtful persons who are like really suspicious and kind of come to conclusion like there's some evil stuff going on. And the extent of the evil is just too hard for the waking consciousness to digest. So as a coping mechanism, we just downplay or deny, and that helps us to deal with this. So anyway, Joe Ruggery's comment, Ruggery, please forgive me, and these last names are unique.
And then this next comment from Addie Hall, I thought was so nice. It's covering our faces, but it's okay. It says, for me, the practice of Krishna consciousness has been a very painful and uncomfortable death of the old self identity. And this is exactly what we were just talking about. Still attached to some old identities. And maybe for this entire time, certainly I've experienced some beautiful moments of feeling connected to Krishna, but mostly just lots of unlearning what I've been conditioned to think my whole life. Lots of grief and tears in the process. It's hard, but I wouldn't change it for anything. I'm still addicted to my phone, but a lot of time is now spent hearing. And I think that this is such, thank you so much, Adi Hall, because I think it's such an honest comment. It's such an honest and sincere comment, but it's something that we all go through. Anyone who's moved into taking spiritual and devotional life more seriously, it's like we go through this ego death where we see the parts of ourselves that weren't not only were they not working, but in many cases were like killing us. You know that verse from Bhagavatam, it was spiritual suicide. It was like internally destroying us and tearing us down. It was what Madhavapuri was saying about that vicious cycle of self-abuse to ourselves in so many different ways.
Can I read something?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, read it. No, go for it.
This is probably shameless, but it's something I wrote. And I'm not really
I can't. Go for it.
I'm I think I'm like any creative. I find it pretty cringy to hear anything that I do like done in public spaces. I don't feel comfortable, but I really did like this thing that I wrote. So I wanted to share it just because Adi Hall, it really relates to her experience. And it's been my experience too, very much with you. I haven't been crying that much because I'm a little bit of a sociopath, but I'm working on it. And I'm learning how to release emotions a little bit healthier ways. But here, I just wanted to read something I wrote about this a little bit earlier in this year around this idea here. So here it is. So this is a quote from Ananda Truma. Okay, anyway, a spiritual leader somewhere. No creature can attain a higher grade of nature without ceasing to exist. Okay, now we're going to give this some context. We're going to give it context. So this is now Jai's voice. Nature self-evidently moves in cycles of creation, dissolution, and regeneration. The inexorability of this process is observed in the cosmic cycles, the moving of the eons and great civilizations of humanity that we hear about, or in the four seasons and transformed individuals available right before our eyes. So the process of creation, dissolution, regeneration, it's everywhere. The process of self-transformation is prudently and cleverly using this process of nature to one's advantage. In other words, instead of running from the painful process of dissolution that is necessarily required for regeneration, he who wants to embody higher or the ideal self runs toward it, knowing that it is anyway inevitable and inexorable, and therefore should be accepted with personal profit. Those who attempt to circumvent this relentless process of nature shall anyway be forced to capitulate, but without profit due to the imprudence of their attachment to the way things were. Human life, as opposed to other life forms, is the only life where we have a unique option to, quote, choose death. The spectrum of such a choice stretches from the problematic acts of suicide to the acts of transfiguration, popularly known as self-help, religion, spirituality, sadhana, and so on. As Shakespeare, through the voice of Hamlet, phrases the central question of human existence, to be or not to be.
I love that.
Thank you.
That was very nice. I didn't see the Shakespeare coming. I was like, oh.
That was actually a quote. So anyway, the central question of human life, to be or not to be. And maybe this can be our next chit chat because I got a lot of stuff on that. I feel like literally today I just had a breakthrough with this question. And frankly speaking, I've been suffering a lot during this process because I was attached to the way things were, and my subtle body hasn't been able to like relinquish it. And because of that, I've been suffering like literally this whole time. I kid you not, today was one of the first days since lockdown started that I actually felt like happy.
Oh my God.
I'm like being dead here. And I'm like, even when I'm sad, I'm good to be around. I'm fun to be around because I'm like funny. Like Black people, you know, people of color, we kind of process our suffering through jokes and all that. Yes. Probably humans, but Black people have a certain special knack in my lived experience. But I feel like today was a breakthrough day because I kind of started to accept that I had to let go of something. Like I could feel the subtle body like relinquishing something. And as a result of that, relinquishing and really new acceptance, because in letting go, there's accepting of something new. Today was the first time since this lockdown started that I actually felt like happy. And I was like, it's gonna be okay. And I could like feel joy, like I felt like my old self in the sense that I felt joy come back. And I'm hoping I can continue this upward mobility. And now that I wake up tomorrow morning, like, you know, where's the gun? I'm kidding. But just really resonating with that a lot. Adi Hall, thank you for that.
And Kavi from Australia says, I feel like I've gone backwards in spiritual practice in COVID. So this was a nice kick to get back on track. There has been so much fear mongering this whole year. And I really am appreciating that, Kavi, and I'm also really appreciating you, Jaya, for sharing your experience, because I think the COVID and the pandemic has been so demoralizing. And we're not going to get into this because I'm not going to open a can of worms. But the more time has passed, the more I'm just like, something's not quite right. Like I can't put my finger on it, but with this whole situation, something's
Demons.
not quite.
Yes.
And it's just like, it's so, it's so intense and so scary. And I feel like so many people can probably relate with what you were saying, Jaya, because it's like on the outward appearance, sometimes we have to put on this like, I'm okay and I'm making, I'm getting through it and etc. But internally there's this deep, what Adi brought up, which was such a wonderful point. And I think maybe that's something we can think about and process a little bit, because it's like, yeah, this practice is sometimes very, very painful in a sense, because it's like we have to allow those parts of ourselves to die, those parts of our ego, those parts of our identity. And just to take it a notch further, I feel like there are a lot of parts of our identity that are in current exploitation, that are currently being exploited. Not, I feel, that is the fact. Current, like, parts of our identity are currently being exploited by our phones and by Instagram and by our thoughts and by, so it's like trying to have the like physical stamina and like, just clarity to try and like break out of that is, it's a lot. It's a lot.
Yeah,
So
shout out to all my friends, and well, people who've been hearing from me from the year. I've been still doing classes and courses and all that. And Srila Sridhar Maharaj, Bhaktivedanta Swami's godbrother, said that anyone who comes to hear from you is your guardian angel, because they engage you in topics about God and spirituality. And so I've got a lot of guardian angels this year. And even though I've been a largely unhappy person, which I obviously didn't share with them, because that's a little discouraging, they have helped me stay afloat in this sort of this sea of tears, if you will, the sea of sorrows, comprised of the tears of the crying souls. And there's a lot of us crying up in this ocean of tears. So I've kept afloat, and yeah, I feel like my wings are starting to come out a little bit. I kind of like the shedding the sloth of the. Is it sloth? Is how you say it when when the snake sheds its
I think
SLOU
so.
SLOUGH. Yeah, I think so.
Something, yeah.
I feel like it's coming off a little bit, and I'm gonna be able to like fly again soon. Not right away, but like some upward mobility is coming. So I just want to say I'm going to say I'm very grateful for the experience. It's been heavy, and it is what it is. It has to be also.
Yes.
But I'm grateful for all the support that God has definitely sent my way in the form of all these different guardian angels, keeping me afloat. And the wings are starting to come out again, and we could continue to move upward. I have to say, I really love this chit chat today.
I love this.
Last week too.
I love this chit chat too. I love chit chat because I mean, we basically are just like with the audience having this like very beautiful, casual, funny conversation, and I love chit chat because it always feels so real. It always feels like very real.
Like I don't have like super long talking points planned out. I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna go and talk to be short, and it feels very natural and wonderful. So yeah, I feel very uplifted today.
Yeah, I was gonna say, just ending on that very hopeful note. Thank you so much, Jaya, for sharing your experience. And then Joe is saying, we are learning so many lessons during this pandemic, but I'm so hopeful that there will be a massive post-pandemic shift in the right direction. We needed this kick in the butt. More and more people are waking up though. And I'm also feeling that. I'm also feeling very hopeful, and I'm also feeling like very excited. I always keep on thinking about like, what's it gonna be like when devotees, like when we get together again, like how we used to,
we'll just leave our body in the
we'll just leave our body.
Too much ecstasy, you just leave the body right on the spot.
It's so interesting. I feel like we really did need this kick in the butt because it really makes you think about how many things we took for granted, you know, like how many of our sangha, our friends, our practices, our life situations we took for granted. And you know, for me personally, I know we're gonna end soon, everyone, but I'll just end with this last point. For me personally, it's been very difficult to just like be out and about in the world and being stable and steady in my Christian consciousness, you know, just like not getting carried away by like the fancy things and the glittery things of life. And, you know, I really am realizing like I took a lot of stuff for granted in the past. And it's making me like every time I think about that, I'm just like, I need to redouble my efforts, you know, I need to like do something. I need to like really catch myself when I'm grabbing my phone instead of my japamala, you know, or doing this instead of that. And like this. But anyway, yes, everyone is saying this
Thank
was fun.
y'all.
It's amazing. Thank you so much, Pat and Prema, Maharani, Brinda Devi, Joe, Namras. Thank you for being here.
Yeah,
Jagadish
now I'm
Hari, Adi.
for a while. I felt very
Yeah,
like touched and
I know,
inspired.
me too. I was like, no, thank you.
I want to say give us a follow on Instagram, Chit Chat.
Yes.
Also give us a like on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or other podcasting platforms. So if you think this message was good for you, then likely it's good for others also. I'm even thinking I need to get the Facebook page. I'm gonna start clipping some of the specific talking points as little videos because this was so real and I feel like cathartic, like a purge of like gook just came out. And
Yes.
so thank y'all so much. Please go and give us a follow on those platforms if you like what you're hearing, and we'll like to encourage us to do more and more. Thank you all so
Yeah.
much.
Thank you all so much. We'll be here next week, Monday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hare Krishna, everyone. Hari Bol. Thank you, Jaya.
Thank you, Kishore. Hari.
Hari Hari.